Hello, everybody. Back in the car. Hasn't been a while since I did this because I haven't been out that much. But I'm meeting someone today, so I have time to have an hour or so to kill. So, cancel culture simpletons and psychotics have now begun to target Goth culture, claiming that it is cultural appropriation and it's too white. Okay, this is if there's one defining element that indicates the modern leftist more than anything else, and probably the traditional leftists as well, is they're just stupid. They're stupid, hysterical, unhinged, volatile, and driven by intense infantile emotionality. Even when they embark on an intellectual path, it has to revolve around. In the old days, it would have been Trotsky and Lenin and Engels and then all kinds of other books on modern books on discussion on Bolshevik ideas. Nowadays, it's all about how many genders you can fit into a can of Heinz beans. Now, other than that, they're stupid. They're stupid. They know nothing about anything. They're stupid, and because they're only focused towards building this utopia in order to cure the disease inside their own personalities. So this is why they target cultural trends and individuals and try to claim it's somehow involved with National Socialism. They're still fighting World War II in their minds and this kind of thing, because Stalin won and they want to keep Stalin's victory going forever. So they've targeted Goth culture. Now, how they have actually managed, you want to talk about psychiatric acrobatics to have them landed on this one. You're going to hear this one. So, let's talk about, what does Goth come from? Well, it comes from the Visigoths originally, who were a European tribe that conquered a lot of southern Europe, including Rome and a lot of Iberia. Okay, they were European white people. Okay, they were an important part in the context of European history because they existed in the changeover between the pagan world and the Christian world. So there were pagan Goths and there were Christian Goths, and the Romans faced both. Now, the name Goth and Gothic led to a type of architecture that was originally Roman, really, and it was things like flying buttresses, which are those kind of things that hold on the side of cathedrals with low-lying foundations to keep them standing. And then there was no Goths for hundreds of years. There was nothing Gothic for hundreds and hundreds of years. Then in the early 1800s, you had an event called the Year Without a Summer. I think it was 1813 or something like that. And because of a volcano in I think it was Indonesia or somewhere like that, the Philippines, the world was covered in a layer of ash. And there was no summer, the Year Without a Summer, and there was no summer that year. And one of the effects of this is that kind of like butterfly effect thing, is Shelley, Lord Byron, and Mary Shelley went to a chateau in Switzerland, and out of the boredom one night they had a thing to compose a ghost story, and the winner was Mary Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein's monster. And that was the beginning of the Gothic literature element. Now, it wasn't called Gothic literature. It was part of the Romanticism scene, the Romanticism. And, but that was sort of like the gestation of what we'd call Goth culture today. That Year Without a Summer. Also at that time, there was something called the Gothic Revival. It came a bit later. And the Gothic Revival used the early Gothic, the style of churches and ecclesiastical design, and started building new buildings with him. And this lasted for a long time. So the Houses of Parliament in London, Tower Bridge, and numerous other structures and many churches were built in this neo-Gothic, Gothic revival style that was quite faithful to the original Gothic style, but a bit more flamboyant. And it was very impressive. We all love it, okay? So, in that period as well, Irish writers played a big part in this. And this is when it started to become known as Gothic in its style. When you had Bram Stoker, who came out with Dracula, and later on The Lair of the White Worm, and Sheridan LaFanu, no relationship. He was a Dublin writer, and you can go visit his grave at an amazingly Gothic cemetery at Mount Jerome in Dublin, which is actually on the Dublin Gothic tour. And he wrote Camilla, the Vampire Lovers. And this is when people started to think of it as a kind of a Gothic movement, dark aesthetic. You know, Edgar Allan Poe would have been a part of the Americana element of that. You know, Arthur Machen, you know, the great god Pan, Bram Stoker, Sheridan LaFanu, and then Mary Shelley's The Frankenstein's Monster would have came out really big. So you had the gestation of all this stuff, right? But that's still not where Gothic culture really comes from, okay? In terms of its style, okay? Like when you think of like Susie Sue, right? This comes later. Where Gothic culture really comes from, in terms of like the look, is from 1920s American and German cinema doing historic epics. The likes of the UFA studios in Berlin and also Hollywood, Cecil B. DeMille, making these epics set in Babylon and Egypt and stuff like that, and these incredible sets, silent movies, beautiful women, and they were kind of done up in an Art Deco stylized version of what they thought ancient Egyptians women might look like, or men. And you know, so those images of Susie Sue as Beset, the Egyptian cat god, are really aesthetically more linked into Cecil B. DeMille films, Berlin fashions, the early days of like the fashion industry with that kind of Art Deco aesthetic. A very beautiful thing, actually. Also, Rudolph Valentino came along with his movies with his oriental mystique, and the girls had that makeup that and that's where Susie Sue got, and a lot of the Goths. There's a famous picture of it. What was her name? Elizabeth, the actress. The actress that was in Austin Powers, really beautiful woman. She's in a picture of her in the Batcave, the original like goth music club in London, and she has like a similar look. So yeah, that's what makes the girls so attractive, and that's it's because they're basing on something like the golden age of early Hollywood and the golden age of German cinema before the war. So what the argument is of these morons is that somehow they're, by invoking Egyptian... So what we're really saying here now is that the Goth culture is English, okay? It's very English, okay? But it has other elements interjected into it from Victorian era. Irish, like I said, Edgar Allan Poe, Bram Stoker and Sheridan LaFanu. American Edgar Allan Poe. Irish again with Harry Clarke. Later on is kind of artwork. That's why he did the artwork for like Edgar Allan Poe's novels. And, so that's all interjected into it, right? So it's really the English-speaking world, right? England, English-speaking Ireland, and American, New England, right? Edgar Allan Poe. Coupled, that's the gestation of the culture of Goth. Completely and totally white European, okay? And if you're to say, well, they appropriated Goth, the name Goth, from the Visigoths, they were white Europeans as well. So you're full of shit there, right? So then we look at the aesthetic, like I said, Cecil B. DeMille films, their interpretation of Hollywood, of ancient Egypt, right? So it's now based on the fact that ancient Egypt was black people. Now, we know there were dark-skinned Egyptians, but it was mostly what we associate with sort of pharaonic we know now from all the DNA of the dummies that they were basically Europeans, like, more or less. There was almost no African in them, okay? And we know Cleopatra was probably more white than Susie Sue. Cleopatra was a Ptolemy, and she was a European white woman, okay? That's what she was, okay? So, this whole nonsense that Goth culture is appropriating Egyptianness is bullshit, because they're they're being inspired by, you fucking morons. They're being inspired by, and I was part of this. I was like, not the first generation Goth, but I was in the sort of like the Goth 1.5 in New York. So like, you can see like the videos up there online of me as a kid, and I'm on an album called Dark New York, which is what that scene became called. Now that brings us up to something else. Early Goth, it wasn't really called Goth until the very late 80s. Well, sort of like the mid-late 80s. Until then, it was called post-punk, because Susie Sue came out of the punk rock scene. And she only started putting on, it was like even right up to Juju, she was still like a kind of a punk. It was only like, the Goth thing had a lot to do with coming out of the new romantic scene. So you see pictures, if you've seen photographs of Boy George when he started out, and on the David Bowie video, he's very gothic looking. And so I would be 1.5, so I'm even on an album called Dark New York, it's out there. So, we didn't call ourselves Goths, we were post-punk. And so Susie and the Banshees and Bauhaus came from the same scene as far as we were concerned musically. The Joy Division, Echo and the Bunnymen came from. And then later on, it kind of developed as people became very influenced by the Banshees and Bauhaus. And then you had like a very overtly gothic-y kind of bands and all this, So look, even the Sister Mercy, they were kind of like a rock and roll band when they started. They're kind of like a dark version of the Stooges or something. So it only later on we all started calling everything goth. It's like just became a handy term for a dark, predominantly British/German music that was encapsulated by the likes of Peter Murphy, Andrew Eldritch, Susie Sue, those kinds of people in that scene. And then it became, it kind of fell into the kind of like crossover metal scene, like bands like Merciful Fate. People would be listening to metal and goth as well, which is pretty cool actually, nothing wrong with that. And then you had like the likes of Marilyn Manson, and then 9 Inch Nails, and all the stuff that came. Like, I wouldn't consider Tim Burton films gothic. I don't even like those movies, but when people call that goth culture, I'm like, that's not goth culture. In the same way, Evanescence are not goth. That was just handy. Like my friend Mary Fowle with October Report, they were considered goth because she used to dress in a black dress, and she had that. But a lot of girls had that look back then, not just goths. So. That's what that was like. That's what that world was like. So, like, where does this all end? Like, we can't play blues music anymore, like, because what these lefties don't understand is that you can be inspired by something. It's not the same thing as stealing it. It's not if anything, it's a tribute. But you could say things like, well, like the Led Zeppelin and Clapton and all these blues guitar players and, all of them. But they had a genuine love for this music, like Rory Gallagher and Robert Trower. Those men had a genuine love for that music, and I don't, no one no one says to the bad brains, how dare you be a bunch of black guys playing punk rock. They don't see him that way. They see him as a punk rock band. They don't even care if they're black. You know, this is again, the left are more obsessed with skin colour than anyone. And, yeah, and there were black goths when I was in the New York scene. There were black girls and black fellas, same age as me, who were into all that music. And they were into the style and the fashions and everything. So, you know, it was like, oh, by the way, shout out to Dave Ball from Soft Cell. And Dave Ball would have been another one. He would, the Soft Cell would have been considered like in that scene, that post-punk scene as well, even though they're a pop band. And, you know, he went on to produce, like, you know, his own album with Gavin Friday, like In Strict Tempo. The Virgin Prunes, Ireland's version of that, but they were never considered for goth band. They were considered like a post-punk band. Again. So, Susie Sue is being targeted by them. And goth culture is being targeted by them. And on every single level, it makes no sense. It's completely wrong. There is absolutely no cultural appropriation, even by the wildest stretch of psychiatric acrobatics. There is no cultural appropriation. Because there's no such thing as cultural appropriation. There's being inspired. There's tribute. There is what art always is. How artists were inspired by, you know, painters were inspired by Japanese art, or Macintosh was inspired by Japanese interior design. It's, you know, it's like, it's just ridiculous. So, you know, this is the latest one, and it screams of desperation. And I'm glad to see a lot of the gothic people fighting back. The ones who are still in the goth scene, not the fans of Top Man, and fighting back and actually, you know, the left is really determined to make everybody, and a lot of the people who would be goths would be kind of, now then it's generally apolitical, but on the whole kind of would be left-wing minded. They're all turning against the left now because of this. So this is what the left excels at, destroying themselves by making themselves look like completely stupid and being bullies while they do it. Take care.